Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of the Underground Kings podcast. Today we are joined by Alex Cowell. Alex, how are you today?
I'm good. How are you?
Doing good.
Good.
Alex, I came across some of your content online, and you talk a lot about nutrition. We kind of have some of the same fitness connects. So to start out, give me a little bit of a backstory on you.
How far back?
Well, as far back as you want to go.
Okay. So I was mentioning I've been down here for a few decades now. Makes me sound old. My background, I studied in school, was biochemistry. I always wanted to be a doctor. So I've always kind of inherently wanted to help people, if not cure, educate. Education is a big part of my passion. I originally moved to the United States, moved to California with my husband, got married, had a baby, was going to go back to work, thought that fits my personality to be in that corporate mold. But having a baby changed me. I decided, okay, I'm probably a little bit more traditional than I thought, and left the corporate world to raise kids and never went back. So my oldest is about to be 20, and I have two other kids. And over the course of time raising kids, I was never able to sit still. I'm kind of a lifelong student, always learning. And I very quickly became interested in health and nutrition, and got very caught up and still very much a part of the medical freedom movement. And a lot of people refer to that as the anti-vax movement, but it's really so much more than that. It's just parental choice and parents being given the ultimate decision-making abilities for their children. So as a young parent, I was very passionate about that. I had young children. As a parent, you would do anything to defend them and protect them. And I found that there was a fairly large conglomerate of folks in the area, in the medical profession, that were firing patients for not adhering to vaccination rules and CDC guidelines. And we're going back 15 years at this point. So I quickly became an advocate in the area for parents who didn't feel confident enough, who didn't feel educated enough to speak up and advocate for themselves or for their children. And that quickly snowballed over the years to helping to educate parents. I've always been of the mindset that an educated decision, no matter what you're doing, whether it's nutrition or fitness or medicine, the decision should always come from a place of education. And I really felt that God put a calling on my life to educate people, and because people don't know what they don't know. And so from the medical freedom movement, I started a group on Facebook, and we're over 2,000 members strong now, and help to advocate some of the activities in the area to raise the awareness around medical freedom and the importance of it. But that quickly changed into, well, now I'm a mom of older kids, and I have time to get back in the gym, pay attention to my nutrition, put my own health first. And that became, well, let me go back to school. Let me become a nutritionist. Let me become an herbalist. Let me become more skilled in helping people to improve their health. And so I fast forwarded from that, and after deciding, I wouldn't say failed, but I had a retail business that I started, my very first business that I started. It was very successful for a couple of years in the social selling space. It was one of the first amongst the social selling group on Facebook before Facebook changed the algorithms on us. That was over 10 years ago. And just decided that retail wasn't for me. That wasn't my space. But it was lots of great learning lessons. I don't think you ever don't learn from a business, whether it's successful or fails. I decided to take a little break from business ownership, but then the seasonal flu of 2018 hit the country.
I love that explanation.
And it was kind of before COVID, it was kind of like the last time we had like a pandemic of sort of epic proportions. And at that time, I had started making organic elderberry syrups for my family. We tried to take a very natural-based approach to medicine, felt that there was a really necessary marriage between alternative and Western medicine. And so our family had always taken the approach of taking care of the temple first and then seeking out Western medicine after that. So we had gotten used to using elderberry syrup in the wintertime to keep our family healthy. Well, the flu hit and everybody in town was looking for elderberry syrup, and they were coming to our door at basically all hours of the day looking for something to help them and their kids. And that was the birth of my next business. In my current business. But in the years leading up to that, I had gone back to school again for nutrition, for herbalism, for a variety of different health disciplines. And so, I've owned Alex's Elderberries and Apiaries now for the last 6 years. And in that 6 years have become very laser focused on nutrition, very passionate about nutrition, on educating myself, but also educating the masses. I have always operated from the viewpoint of not trying to ram my opinion down people's throat. I think that I try to operate under the theory of you catch more flies with honey than with vinegar. And as a result, over the years, I think I've managed to build a fairly decent following of people that trust me. And when people come to you and they trust you, you feel a sense of personal responsibility. And so, like I said, constant student of life, constantly educating myself. And then about 4 years ago, fell into fitness really hard. Had spent my whole life, I was a semi-professional ballet dancer for 12 years. Fell away from that and then came back to exercise and fitness about 4 or 5 years ago. And quickly fell into a love for extreme sports of such, and fell into Spartan races and pushing my body beyond what it thought it could do, what society thought it could do, what my gender thought it should be doing. And that kind of brings us to where we are today. So that's kind of me summed up in a 5 or 8 minute nutshell.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
There's a lot to unpack there.
There's a lot, yeah.
I want to start at that beginning transition, when you made that decision to leave the corporate world behind and focus on being a mother first and foremost.
Mm-hmm.
What were some of the thoughts or maybe the pros and cons that you were weighing at the time, and what truly inspired you to make that transition?
Absolutely. So my husband and I were living in California. We were living in San Francisco, which at the time was the most expensive city in the country to live in. We were renting, this was back in 2000, 2001, or 2001, 2002 timeframe. And we were renting a 750 square foot apartment on near the Fisherman's Wharf for like $2,000 a month. And we had always said, we both had great jobs. He was working in the Bay Area. I was working in the East Bay. Great jobs, young, lots of promise ahead of us, and great city to live in without kids. But then I got pregnant unexpectedly, I think happens to a lot of us. And I always planned that, okay, well, listen, in Canada where I'm from, moms get 1 year of maternity leave, but in America they get 12 weeks. So we'll kind of hope that all works out. And then my son was born. He was a preemie. He was almost 8 weeks early. And I think coupled with him being early and also some sort of maternal motherly instinct really kicks in when you're pregnant. I had always pictured myself a working mom. I'm the product of working parents. I was a latchkey kid. Hello, Gen X. And none of that seemed odd to me. That to me was just my normal, my reality. And I don't think I turned out poorly because of it. But it's a different world. And I think that more so now than what I realized back then, but again, probably a God thing, just realizing that I think our kids need even more protection today than they needed 20 and 30 and 50 years ago. So my husband and I, we made a decision pretty quickly after the birth of our son that we didn't want him taking his first steps in front of someone else. We didn't want him having his first word in front of someone else. We didn't want there to be bumps and bruises and sad tears with someone else besides a parent. So we we looked for about 3 seconds to buy a house in that area and quickly realized that wasn't a great reality for us with one income, with my husband's income only. So my in-laws had just moved here to the beach from New Jersey. And on a whim, one day my mother-in-law sent the newspaper clipping of the real estate section of the local newspaper and said, hey, in case Alex would ever consider moving to the East Coast again, what do you think about moving to Myrtle Beach? And we did, and it's become a much more affordable way to raise our kids here at the beach than it was in an expensive big city. And I would do it all again in a heartbeat, no matter what city it was. I'm a city girl at heart. I was born in Toronto. I met my husband in Montreal, and we lived in San Francisco. So I love the city. I loved everything it represented. But something just clicks when you have a child, and it becomes very primal. I think especially in women and men, I can't speak for men, but in me as a mother, something very primal kicked in when I had my first child. And it was a matter of, well, we just do anything it takes to protect this child. That's all there is to it. Okay, so it's going to be a move across the country and we're going to cut our income in half. Then that's what we do. And I've always felt very strongly about that, about doing whatever you can to protect your kids while you have them for that 18 or 19 years that they're in your care.
So that transition then, it felt much more natural to you or more innate. You spoke of it from a primal sense. It wasn't so much a weighing out the pros and cons as I maybe previously had said, but it was more of just a primal calling towards motherhood.
Yes, and I think at the time I didn't realize that's what it was, because we certainly did crunch the numbers. My husband's a numbers guy. He loves his Excel spreadsheets. And there was a lot of that. And thankfully, he is probably more of a traditional husband in the fact that it was very easy for him to make the decision that, okay, we're going to sacrifice for my wife to be home with our child or our children. And I think he probably was even a little bit more of that primal instinct or that paternal instinct than I had. For me, I was just kind of, I don't know, maybe I was still in a postpartum hormonal days or I don't know. It felt right to me. But now looking back 20 years ago, I realized that it was a combination of the changes happening in me, which I really feel were a result of just kind of God working on my heart at that time. I didn't have a relationship with God at the time. I hadn't been raised in the church, save for Easter and Christmas. But I think there was something very supernatural moving in my heart as well at that time. And looking back now, in hindsight, it was definitely God moving in my heart and putting that desire to be a mother first on my heart.
That's a beautiful thing. So let's transition into the fitness component.
Yes.
So I have seen some of your photos on Instagram. I saw that you were running some Spartan races. And it's obvious to me that you are within circles of people as well that like to push themselves. What drew you to that? And what do you feel that you're getting out of an experience where you are, the way I've always described it is like your body's going to quit far before your mind ever will. And all the true knowledge to be gained about your body and about yourself is within that window of time. It's when your body is screaming, stop, and yet you are able to kind of just have that internal monologue of like, I'm in charge actually. And you can continue to press on. So what draws you to that circle, to that realm? And then what is it that you feel that you're getting out of pushing yourself to those limits and those extremes?
Oh, that's a lot. Well, and as you were talking, I was thinking in my head, and I referenced earlier my husband, and I think that I am very attracted to high achievers. When I'm at my and intense high achievers. I think that I feel a kinship or an attachment to people who make no apologies for sacrificing to achieve their goals. And my husband and I we have been together almost 23 years. And when I met him, some of his proudest accomplishments in life were that he had been a master jump master in the 82nd Airborne. He had gone through Ranger School. He had gotten his expert infantry badge. And if anybody who knows anything about the military, if you don't go into combat, then you have to seek out an expert, an infantry badge on your own. And when he has been asked in the past, well, why did you go in the military? Why did you do all those things? Now, despite the fact that he is intensely patriotic and loves this country, he said, people were asking, well, why did you go after those things? And he said, those were just my goal. And he said, because most people don't go after those things. And I think that very early on, that might have planted something in my mind that I didn't really fully understand and embrace until I had the time myself to really seek out some of those really hard push goals, physical goals. And so the fact that I am married to a husband like that, who to this day is still in the gym, and we have 2 teenage boys who their goal in life is to outbench their dad, and they still can't yet. And my husband says that day's going to come, but it's not today. But this idea of pushing yourself intensely and not staying stagnant. I hate to sound contrite, but there's a saying, if you're not growing, you're dying. And I think the older you get, the more you're intensely focused in on the fact that you are dying. Every day you're dying. And so what can you do? Not to necessarily stop the process, but to just not waste away every day. So I got really tired of seeing women and men, but women my age, just letting themselves go and becoming that stereotype, becoming that cliche, that middle-aged woman who just goes home at night and has to drink half a bottle of wine and, has to go to her book club and complain about her husband. And those are stereotypes, but they are definitely very true stereotypes. And that angered me, this idea that there couldn't just be women out there who were either happy with their lives and willing to talk about it, or willing to change it if they weren't happy with it. And I realized that all of my life, when I first started working out a couple years ago, 5 years ago, whatever, I was like, I've been skinny my whole life, and it's kind of come really easy to me. And I thought to myself, but I've never really had muscles, and I've never really been strong, and I've never had this idea of functional fitness and functional training. So I had a coach at my gym who you've interviewed, and he'd constantly be coming to me and telling me what he was doing next to level up. And, it would be a Spartan race, or it would be running the 4x4x48 that Goggins does. And he'd be like, hey, you want to do this? You want to do it? Want to do that? Let's do it. And having somebody, I think this is why your inner circle is so important. Having people around you who are better than you, who don't take your shit, and who encourage you to be better, and who will let you kind of have your pity party, but then say, okay, now it's done. Wake up, let's go. What are we doing next? I think having people like that around me is what really fed that fire. And I remember running my very first Spartan race, and there's some obstacles it's really hard to train for if you don't have facilities in your hometown that you can practice. And for me, that was rope climbing. And so my very first Spartan race was in Atlanta, and I was with my husband and my teenage son, who at the time was, I think, 16 or 17. So all full of testosterone and strength. And my husband, who's this ex-airborne ranger, and me. And I remember the rope climb was the end of a 13-mile race. And I just felt like I had nothing left in the tank. And my husband had finished a little bit before me, had walked back on the course and was filming me. And I'm telling you, there's nothing like a little motivation, knowing that someone's filming you doing something. And it's like, even though we've been together a long time, like, impressing him is still an important thing to me. And I would say that he'd probably the same thing about me, as he came home and told me last night that he got a new PR and bench. And I think that's important. I think you need to have people that are cheering you on, but that you can brag to, and that you also don't want to let down. And let me tell you something. I had nothing left in that tank, but apparently I had something left in that tank, because I made it to the top of that rope and came back down again, and then proceeded to do some monkey bars, which I didn't think I could do either. And those little wins, even though I felt like trash, even though it probably took me a week to recover after that race, that just sparked a fire in me. It was just that first race. And then other people started to find out that I was doing these, and they wanted to start doing them as well. I'm not the first woman in her 40s to do a Spartan. I know that. But I think that when you share with other people your struggles and your wins, it makes it a lot more real. It makes it more human to them. And so since then, I've just tried to keep one-upping myself. It's like, okay, I've done the Spartans now. What do I do next? And I haven't run the 50K Spartan, so I'm doing that this year, which is terrifying to me. But it's always, well, what's next? Okay, that was great. What's next? And I think that's how you prevent yourself from stagnating, is just asking yourself, okay, what's next?
Is it safe to assume that that trainer was Kurt?
Yes, it was Kurt.
Okay.
It was Kurt. So if he's watching, hi, Kurt.
I'll have to send him that. So when it comes to Kurt, like, I remember, like, it's you speak very well on the importance of surrounding yourself with people like that and true friends, people that truly want the best for you, because those that truly want the best for you are going to tell you what you need to hear, not necessarily what you want to hear.
Right.
And Kurt's one of those guys that I can speak from the male perspective. For me and the way that I operate is, even like hearing what I need to do, you know, is one thing for me, but someone just going out and just doing it and just setting that example, Kurt's one of those guys. And I remember, you know, I've actually just recently gotten into running. I'm starting to do the hybrid training thing that's kind of buzzing around right now. And I see Kurt out, what must have been just a couple weeks ago, on his Instagram story, and he's just on there just being himself like usual, and he's like, yeah, I like haven't trained at all, but I'm gonna run a marathon today. Yeah. And like, I'll update you guys every couple of miles, every 5 miles. Yeah. And I watched every one of those stories. I'm like watching it as it's coming in, and I'm like, he's just a madman. He really is. But I watched it and immediately was like, I'm out here doing like 5Ks every day, and like, I need to
step it up.
I need to
step it up.
Like,
yeah.
what?
I mean, you need a little crazy in you. And if you don't have it, you have to borrow it from somebody around you. And I'm so thankful for the couple of years I got to train with Kurt, because he's got just enough of that crazy that it spills over. And there were so many times he would come to me and say, hey, I'm going to do this. You want to do this with me? Like, and I'm talking about the 4x4x48 with the David Goggins thing. And I said, I'm like, what is that? And he said, I'm going to run 48 miles in, you know, every 4 hours, you know, whatever, 4 hours, every 4 hours, 48 hours. And I said, why? And I stopped asking that with him eventually. That first year he did it, I think he did it 2 years in a row. The first year he did it, I don't think I had ever run more than a 5K at a time. And he had time slots we could sign up in. I didn't do the whole thing with him, but he had time slots. Some of us at the gym, some of us crazy people, could sign up to keep him company, especially those overnight 4-hour blocks or 4 mile blocks. So I signed up to do one block with him. I think I ended up doing 2 or 3 because I was so just inspired to. I was very untrained. I had no business running 12 miles over the course of that day, but I did. And there was a really important lesson out of that, which is I didn't die. I could do this. And being around other people, when he ran his final 4 miles, he finished at Market Common. And I think there was like 25 or 30 of us that came out from the gym to run his last 4 miles with him. So that's the impact he has had on countless people in this area, including myself. I mean, I'm just one small person, one cog in the wheel. But it showed me the importance of who you surround yourself with, and also to not stay stagnant. Like, stagnancy will kill. It will kill any spirit. And so that's why I'm constantly like, and my husband sometimes gives me a hard time. He says, it's always something. There always has to be something new. And even if I'm like, oh, I don't know what I'm doing this weekend, let me see if there's any 5Ks. Let me go run a 5K race. Like, just to be kept in constant motion, because I have learned about myself that staying in constant momentum is very important for me, because it's very easy to fall out of momentum and then never get back on that treadmill ever again. You know, the hypothetical and the actual treadmill. So staying in momentum is a really big deal for me.
So I'd like to do another transition, and I've got to ask, what this elderberry syrup?
Yes.
Is it? Explain to me what exactly.
What is it?
Is there an elderberry bush? I mean,
yeah, there is. So it's an old-timey medicine that was in medical journals and healers' journals before the 1900s. So there's an elderberry bush, and it's a berry. It looks like a tiny little size of it's smaller than a blueberry. It grows on a cluster, and it has very potent antifungal, antiviral, and antibacterial properties. And so it's been used to help with viral illnesses, bacterial illnesses. The flowers are also very medicinal, the flowers before they become a berry. And so elderberry syrup is one of these things that have been passed down from generation to generation. And I think a lot of the natural remedies that fell by the wayside through the probably 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, up into, I think, the mid-2000s. But things are making a comeback as people are becoming more and more weary of always relying on conventional pharmaceuticals. So I started making elderberry syrup when my 19-year-old was 4 as a means to help him if he had a fever, if he had a runny nose, if he had allergies. And as I mentioned, in 2018, we had a big upcropping of the flu around here. The local news did a story about elderberry syrup and how it was sold out on the shelves everywhere, all the conventionally made elderberry, which is nowhere near as superior as a homemade remedy. And I think there was just a small handful of elderberry makers in this area that were able to keep up with the demand. And so that was kind of how the demand for elderberry syrup grew, and people understood what it was like. And people who were always the kind to rely on, well, I take my Dayquil and my Sudafed and my ibuprofen, and I do not mess with all that natural junk. Like, those people were coming out of the woodwork saying, I'll try anything. And it really is, it's a very effective tool. It has been studied. There are PubMed journals about the effectiveness of elderberry syrup, from everything from its anti-inflammatory properties to its ability to lessen the flu by up to 72 hours, the seasonal flu. And so that's kind of where it came from. And because I am a purist and I have very high standards for myself and for my family, I've always made all of my products with all organic ingredients. I became a beekeeper just as a means of finding a clean, raw honey. I don't have to worry about my bees being sprayed with anything or my honey being treated with anything. And that's just me. If I can't find somebody to help me with something, I go and learn how to do it myself. I think that just probably defines me, and which is why there's so much to unpack. When I was telling you about myself, it's because I'm just love to learn. I'm just always love to learn. So I have 2 formulas. I have an original formula. I have a seasonal support formula that I have formulated for my son who has really bad allergies. So I went back to school for herbalism and figured out what synergy of herbs would be great for allergies mixed with elderberry syrup. And so that's my business. So I have a bunch of retailers in the local area, and then I ship online. And that's kind of my main hustle right now until another one comes along. Yeah.
I need to try this stuff.
Yeah, of course. I should have brought you a bottle.
Well, I'll be sure to order some. So as far as it seems to me like you definitely have done some schooling. You seem to be very knowledgeable about the nutrition aspect of things. I have to ask, do you have a viewpoint or an opinion on the carnivore diet?
Oh, I didn't see that question coming.
Yeah, I'm very curious about that, because I know some people who have done the carnivore diet, most of which saw Joe Rogan talk about it once and were like, hey, I'm going to try it.
Yes.
I myself am not on the carnivore diet, but I am probably somewhere in the range of 85 to 90% carnivore. And I'm very curious to know what your thoughts are.
What my thoughts are? I hate it. No, I'm just kidding. I don't hate it. Well, first and foremost, let me preface this by saying I believe very wholeheartedly in the concept of bioindividuality. So I think the carnivore diet is a fantastic choice for the people it's working for. And I know that there's a very polarizing opinions on carnivore, on, keto, and I've always believed if it's working for you, and when I say working, not just it makes you feel good, but hey, your blood levels look better, you're able to perform. If you're using it for performance, great. I have never done carnivore myself, but I have done what is known as animal-based. And that came out of the, if you're not familiar, that's basically carnivore with fruit and honey and raw dairy. So that...
Are you familiar with Carnivore MD on...
Yeah, Paul Saladino. Yeah. And he's also very polarizing because, he hates oatmeal and all this kind of thing. And while I do think that oats can be harmful for some people, I think there are other people, myself included, who can eat them with no problem. And I love to use them as a pre-workout sometimes. But I did animal-based for almost an entire year. It was actually, I did the Live Hard year, so 75 hard with all the phases. So I completed that whole year 2 years ago with 2 of my local goal buddies. And that was an intense year. And I did animal-based that whole year. And it was great. It served me great. My body felt great on it. It cuts out refined starches. It allows you to keep your healthy carbs, your fruit. It cuts out vegetables, which I think a lot of people are happy to not eat vegetables. I like vegetables, but just for the sake of experimentation, I cut them out as well. And I think that with carnivore, I have spoken to a lot of people specifically that have specific disorders. I've spoken to people that have skin disorders, people that have autoimmune issues. Autoimmune is hugely on the rise in this country. And I think it would behoove our country and the agencies that be to not study the effects of carnivore, which is, carnivore, I think, kind of gained in popularity on the heels of keto. And keto was created as a very therapeutic diet as well. It was created for epileptics. And if keto is properly studied and your blood levels are taken and your ketones are measured regularly, it's very effective. But what we ended up seeing, which tends to be an American thing, is we tended to see a bastardization of keto into what I like to call dirty keto, with people saying, yeah, I can eat sugar-free whipped cream and I can eat all the bacon I want and I can eat sugar-free Jell-O pudding. And I'm like, no, that's not keto. Even if it kind of fits the parameters, like what are you doing to your body by doing that? With carnivore, what I love about carnivore is that it's whole foods. So I think that the body is always going to do best on whole foods. And I think for some people that is going to mean having to cut out flours and grains and seeds and nuts. And I think for other people, that's not what it means. So I'm really a proponent. I was a nutrition coach for many years, and at one time I had 5 clients that were all on different dietetic theories. I am a big fan of macro-based eating, regardless of what diet you follow. But understanding that some of your macronutrients are processed much differently. Eating 300 grams of protein is different than eating 300 grams of carbs. It just affects definitely on your body. And also depending on what you're doing for exercise. When I am really deep in the throes of functional fitness training, I have to increase my carbohydrate intake, and my body does really well with quick absorbing carbs like rice and oatmeal. But when I am just weightlifting, which right now I'm just weightlifting 4 or 5 days a week, and I also teach bar. When I'm just doing that, I do fine on an animal base. So just meat and fruit and some cheese and milk. So I think it comes down to how you feel. And I think that people become very zealous about selling a particular theory, and I don't particularly love that. And there are some people that I follow on Instagram who I love their research. I love what they have to say about everything. But in the midst of building up their beliefs, they're having to put down others. And I'm not a big fan of that. Even today, I am not a fan of a properly done keto diet, but I see the benefit of it. And if it works for you, then I say do it. So my biggest thing is, how clean is your food? Where are you sourcing from? And as much as people hate it, I think you have to, if you have weight or fat loss goals, or weight or muscle gain goals, you have to track. And people are very against that, especially women, I find, because I grew up through the 90s where the supermodel waif look was very popular. And so I think a lot of my generation had to deal with like the PTSD from that. But then I see the girls today from in the current generation of late teen to 20-year-old girls who have had to deal with social media being in their faces their whole life, which is just as bad, if not worse, and the constant judgment. So I think that you need to have that good relationship with your food and whatever, I mean, like they say, the best diet is the one you can stick to. And I really think it is. But it also is the one that's going to feed your goals, feed your body. As I'm getting older, things that worked for me 10 years ago don't work anymore. And so I think it's important to work with somebody, whether it's a health coach or a nutritionist, even some dietitians, although, again, I'm always hesitant with people that have been educated through the funding of government programs. But there are some great RDs out there, so nobody watching this, send me any letters. And I think it's really important to work with somebody who can kind of look at your goals as a snapshot and then talk to you and say, how do you feel? How is this working for you? What are your physical fitness goals right now? And are these helping you meet it? I think that's really where it comes from. So I think carnivore is a great dietetic theory if you enjoy it and it works for you. I mean, I have no problem eating steak every single day, but I also really like fruit. So I couldn't do just strictly carnivore for that reason. So
I absolutely agree with your outlook on that. I think the only people that I do very firmly stand against is the a calorie people. Mm-hmm. They are the only ones that I'll butt heads with all day, every day. Because it's simply not the reality. Mm-hmm. 400 calories in a Snickers bar as opposed to 400 calories in steak. To argue that a calorie is a calorie is just ludicrous to me. You mentioned you did the Live Hard program.
I did.
Talk to me a little bit about that. This is kind of my personal curiosity. I'm on day 72 right now.
Oh, of 75 hard?
This is my second time doing just the 75.
Mm-hmm. Good for you.
But I'm very curious as far as what's entailed with the Live Hard.
So I did it. I finished it in 2022. I started with two local my girls who I met through the gym, and we had it so that we would be able to finish at the end of December because there are some time parameters. So you do your 75 hard days, which, as you know, it's, following your diet, reading your pages, working out twice a day. So you do that, and then you can, it's been 2 years now, but you can swing right into phase 1 right away. And phase 1 is 75 hard. And it also adds in, I may be getting it wrong, so if I'm bastardizing it, I apologize. But it basically brings in, your 5-minute cold showers, your manifesting. You have to spend time manifesting. And when you listen to the podcast that Andy Frisella does he explains what that means. It's literally closing your eyes and he uses the example of if you have your dream house, let's say you go running on the same road every day and you see a house and you say, one day I'm going to own that house. And, manifesting is sitting down and closing your eyes and saying, okay, I'm going to get this house. And when I have this house, the internal countertops are going to be this color and the cabinets are going to be this color. And this hallway is going to lead to this room. And in that room, it's going to be this. And so that's the idea. He walks you through how to manifest because that's a very kind of out there concept for a lot of people, especially people like me who like things in a package and like things compartmentalized. And abstract concepts are difficult, I think, for the kind of person that is attracted to doing 75 hard. Now, you're in marketing, so because you probably have that artistic flair about you, it may not be difficult for you. It's very difficult for me. It was the most difficult part, and I thought it'd be the cold showers. So you have to do your 5-minute cold shower, and it's full immersion under a running stream of water. It isn't an ice bath. It's, you have to feel this cold water pelting from the top of your head down to the tips of your toes for 5 minutes straight. And that's the longest 5 minutes of your day. Let me tell you something. And then it's done, and then it's done. And so that's your phase 1. Phase 2 is, I believe, just another 30 days of 75 hard. Someone is going to watch this and say, no, she's getting it wrong. Phase 2, I think, is just another 75 hard, but you have to wait 30 days at least from phase 1 to phase 2. And then you have to wait between phase 2 and phase 3. And phase 3 is everything you've done up until that point for the last 30 days. And it has to happen 30 days before the anniversary date of beginning 75 hard. So you can't just do all of the phases. Boom, 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 boom. Like this has to take you 1 year. So we had to time it so that we started, I think we started like the first week of December, we started phase 3 so that we would be done for January 1st. And yeah, so you have to kind of sit there and map it all out. I plugged it all into my phone, figured out like, was I going to be anywhere during some of these days? And I'm going to tell you, doing, and you know, you're doing 75 hard now. We started January 1st. It was a miserable winter. It rained. I had to buy rain boots. I had to buy rain pants. I had to borrow cold weather gear from friends because my second workout of the day was usually a walk. And it has to be an outdoor. You have to have one of your workouts has to be outdoors. And so a couple of times I would do like a Pilates or something, exercise outside. I'd pull a yoga mat out onto my driveway and I would do that. Or I would do some sort of CrossFit type-ish exercise outside. But it was wintertime. It wasn't a great winter, so it ended up being my walk. And fun fact, during that time, I actually was out on my walk one night. And my husband was with me because it was like 10 o'clock at night, and I had to get this done. And I had my very first asthma attack. I had COVID that Christmas, just like a couple months before. And I discovered that I had asthma while out on a walk in the cold weather because that exacerbates asthma. And so I had exercise-induced asthma that I discovered during 75 hard, which we think was brought on by COVID. But so that was a gift I got from 75 hard. But then we did it, and then we were done. But I'm going to tell you, one of my goal partners, her name is Rachel, and she lives up in North Myrtle. Her husband is also something of a beast and also went to the same gym as us. He's a firefighter. And we, in the weeks following 75 Live Hard, we continued to follow the program for a couple of weeks after we were done. And then we got to a point where we almost fell into almost a mourning period, because it was a year of our lives that we had done this. And there was a good amount of sacrifice. There was a lot of, man, this sucks some days. And it's such a big goal, and then it's done. And you're like, what's and next? you kind of think, well, everyone's going on with their life. What's going on? Like you almost don't, you're kind of despondent because you don't know what to do. And I think that's what happens. And that's the importance of setting big goals, is to have that feeling, because then you're like, okay, what am I doing next? And she's also somebody who I've run Spartans with, who we've seen through various injuries. And so you always have to have that person in your life that kind of brings it back to you. In fact, funny enough, last weekend I was supposed to run the Atlanta Spartan trail race, which is just a little 10K. But I had abdominal surgery in November, which I'm still kind of, coming back from. And she texted me 2 days before the race, and she said, do you think we should just say screw it and just go run this thing in Atlanta? And she's got like hip flexor issues. I've had abdominal surgery, and we both kind of were like, well, maybe. And then we ultimately decided not to do it, probably because it was far enough. Like if it had been like Fayetteville or something, maybe we would have gone a couple hours away, but it's 6 hours away, whatever. But you need someone, like I said, it's that little bit of crazy, right? You got to have that person with that little bit of crazy. And so we didn't end up doing it. So now I'm just gonna kick off my Spartan season with a 50K in May. So, but the Live Hard year, I say go for it. It's a great thing to do.
It's interesting. You said the manifesting component was challenging for you. I would see that being very challenging for me. Mm-hmm. The issue I always had with manifesting, because I have a lot of friends, a lot of people in my circle that very much preach its importance. It's just never been something I've ever integrated into my life, because every time that I had done it, typically speaking, it's like you're kind of going through that vision process of what it is that you want to achieve or you want to attain. The only time I think I ever experienced manifestation successfully was when I was playing sports growing up. And I would always envision myself in the game, scoring the game-winning goal or whatever it was. But for me, a lot of times I've felt a lot of friction with the manifesting stuff because it always felt like I was lying to myself.
Mm-hmm.
And I've always had a hard time accepting the lies. Like, I just want to know the truth. I've always had good people in my corner that would tell me what I needed to hear.
Mm-hmm.
And if I was getting out of shape or I was slacking, I didn't want to hear like, oh, like, here's what you can become. I wanted to hear like, hey, like, dude, like, get yourself in check.
Mm-hmm.
Or, hey, you're XYZ. And I'm very hard on my friends as well. And I have a very tight circle probably for that reason.
Yeah, me too. Not a lot of friends, but my friends do come to me and say, I know you'll give it to me straight. Yeah. So can I tell you how I addressed the situation? Can you? And I have a particular friend, she just called me the other day about it. And she said, I know you'll hand it to me straight. So tell me, and I know you'll hand it to me in love, even though it's not going to be wrapped in a pretty package. And I think with the manifestation, for me, what I have a problem with is I see the value of it. I do. I understand moving in the direction of your focus. And so I do see the importance of like a vision board. I do see the importance of goal casting and manifesting for me. And maybe I just look at it wrong or I've been doing it wrong, but to me, it's very fluffy. And I've never been somebody attracted to fluffy. And I think part of, we hear that the world is so soft right now. And I think I find that I scoop myself all the way to the other end of the spectrum sometimes, to the point where I have to stop myself from being too hard or too rigid about things, because I have such a dire attempt to not be weak and soft and fluffy. And, and that's, especially as a woman, there's expectations upon you to be that way sometimes. And I think that's okay. I think there's beautiful differences between men and women. And I'll never apologize for that. I think femininity is a great thing, but I think what feminism has become and what femininity means to a lot of people are very different things. And so being in a hobby or a sport where it is male dominated, I think I've always been more attracted to that because it removes the fluff. It really does. Sports and some of these more extreme things that you tend to see that are more male dominated, like Spartans. I don't need to be better than the men. I'm not so insecure in myself that that's such a goal. I'm like, oh, I have to beat this guy. I don't care. Some women want to, and that's okay. I don't mind. But for me, it's not about that. But I want to be able to do the same things. Like if, my husband and my son can do every single Spartan obstacle there is. Well, I want to do every single Spartan obstacle there is. I'm half their size, so I don't need the same amount of muscle that they have because they've got to move more body weight across the same surface. But I think that there's a great sense of accomplishment in putting yourself in situations that people wouldn't normally expect you to succeed in. And that, I think that requires a lot of grit. And I think that's what's missing today from a lot of people, men and women. I mean, not just women, but we have this whole epidemic of men being too soft and not stepping into their, masculinity. And that's a huge problem. And I think that when I look back at what attracted me to my husband, and my husband and I, we clash horns a lot. We are both very, very passionate, extreme personalities. But at the heart of the matter, and I think this comes in your friend group too, we have the same values. We believe the same thing about how our children should be raised. We both put God at the center of our relationship, and at the center of our hearts. We believe that men are men and women are women. We believe this is a great country. We have a lot of the same core foundational values. So even when we're fighting about really stupid things that escalate into really bizarrely huge fights, at the heart of it, we still believe all the same things. And I think that's what attracted me to him. And I think that the other men that have been in my life, like my trainers and whatnot, who just make no apologies for their masculinity. And it's nothing to do with any kind of an attraction or a sexual attraction. It's you are attracted to people in life who encompass the same values that you do, whether they're the same sex or not. And I think that with the manifesting, it's funny because everyone I've ever spoken to in my friend circle is like, oh man, the manifesting, I hate that part of 75 Hard, is Because, well, we all tend to encompass the same values. Like we don't hold value in being soft with our goals, in being apologetic and not standing in our truth, in offending other people. I know a lot of the things I say offend people. I don't particularly care because those people aren't my people. You know, if what I'm saying is offending you, you're probably not my people anyways. And I think it's a great way for God to weed out the people that don't need to be in your life. I'm not a people pleaser. I never have been. And I think that, you know, with the manifesting, going back to that, I took it as one thing, but I think it can be used as something else. And I think the vision board thing, for me, I discovered it like 2 weeks into that phase, that if I made a vision board, that focusing on that for 10 to 15 minutes a day was a much better use of my time. Because I get into my brain and then I start thinking, oh, I've got to make my kids lunches, and when am I going to the gym? And like my brain just won't shut off. But if I've got something to look at and I'm like, oh, look, there's the trip I want to take. And there's the, you know, there's the PR I want to hit. And there's the, you know, that's how fast I want to be running a mile by the end of the year. And like, if I've got all that in front of me, I think that people like you and I are probably more attracted to things like that, because that's concrete. Yeah, it's tangible. It's concrete. It's like, I can see that there. It's not just, let's just see what my brain decides to conjure up in the next 10 or 15 minutes. So, yeah.
I can, you know, I can really think back on some of the times when I went to certain individuals that I knew, and I wouldn't necessarily say they were part of my innermost circle, but just kind of some acquaintances that I had or business partners, et cetera. And, you know, I told them, you know, I gotta get out of this current situation I'm in. You know, at one point in time, I'm living in this shithole apartment in Surfside Beach, working ungodly amount of hours trying to grow the marketing company, starting a pie. I'm doing 1,000,001 different things. I'm trying to push myself physically to my limits. And I'm just like, I check out from work almost never, but I go back and I don't have, there's zero peace anywhere for me. And to me, that's okay. I've always really thrived in chaos.
I was gonna say, I don't hear anything wrong. No, I'm
yeah,
just
no.
I understand that because I've lived that. Yeah.
It's like the problem for me was if I would almost like I want that feeling of chaos, but I like to feel that I'm in control. I do like to feel like I'm in control, and there are certain things. And for me, they were like, hey, you know, you should be just manifest your way out of that apartment onto the next thing. Like,
how'd that go over?
you know what? How it went over? It went over me getting maybe like halfway through trying like the in the mirror meditate or whatever it was manifestation that they said. Like maybe getting like 3 words into it and being like, this is a crock of shit. This is not for me.
Yes.
It's like I am, because the way they said was to declare that you are the things that you want to be. Right. And I got, like I said, like the first statement in is like, I am successful. And I'm like, well, what does that mean? What is success? And I'm sitting there and I'm like, you people really are starting your days like this? Like you're starting your day by lying to yourself over and over and over again. Lying to myself has never helped me attain anything. In reality, it's facing the truth. It's like, hey, you're in a shitty spot. So like, what are you going to do to get yourself into a better position? Oh, I'm out of shape. I'm in great shape. Like, no, you're not. Go to the gym.
But truth is obviously a core value for you. And that is something that, you know, I have a few years on you, but that's something I've learned about myself that I've always valued in other people. I don't take well to somebody not being truthful to me. In fact, I have the type of personality, right or wrong, that it's very easy for me to cut someone out of my life, like just like that, and never think of them again if they are dishonest to me, because that I've learned that's one of my core values. And I always tell people, if you know what you stand for, and I use this a lot when I talk about politics with people, which most people don't like to talk politics with me, but if you know what you stand for, you can't get upset, you know, because this is my truth. Like there's no reason for me to be upset about this. You know, when I stand in my truth, other people can't faze me. And I am okay standing in my truth, even if I'm by myself. And you know, I think once in my life I tried that manifesting thing, and I said the same thing. I'm like, this is such a lie. This is such a lie. I'm not these things. I would like to be, and I'm going to put the wheels in motion to be those things. But I think what you define as success and what I define as success are going to be two, not you, but, you know, the proverbial you, are going to be two different things. And because of that, I think that the thing that people like you and I have to worry about is the standards are so high for ourselves. And that becomes very difficult sometimes, because it's always like, well, what am I going to do to become better? What am I going to do to become better? And, you know, I'm going through this right now, having, you know, like I said, having had surgery in November, and of course went in for some repairs to was not a tummy tuck. It was a hernia. It was a hernia repair. But my surgeon ended up finding all this other damage in there and more repairs and everything else. And up until 2 or 3 days before I went in for surgery, I mean, I was working out 5-6 days, lifting heavy 5-6 days a week, and running a couple days a week. Had coming off a Spartan season, and then to be completely immobile. I mean, I could walk. When I say immobile, I mean like I couldn't lift or anything. For like 12 weeks, I couldn't lift weights. And
that's hard. When
I tell you that that was probably one of the physically most devastating things that has ever happened to me, because when I could finally go back to lifting, and that was just like maybe 6 weeks ago, it's taken me up until this point. My surgery was beginning of November. So November, December, January, February, March. So 5 months. I am just starting to find my groove again. Like, I was talking myself out of going to the gym more days than not through all of February and, you know, some of March. I'd get to the gym and be like, I don't really know what to do here. And it was only after a sense of panic set in, because my husband and I talk about the fact that we're going to be running Spartan races till we're 80, because we see these guys on the race course and we're like, that's going to be us. Like, they're going to be like having to push us across, you know, with a cane. But we're going to be doing it. Like, we are intent on living every moment on this earth as healthy as possible. And it messed with my brain. That was probably when I could have used some manifestation, because I said, oh my gosh, my mojo's gone. Like, everything's gone. I went back to teaching bar, and that was fine. But, you know, that isn't a huge push on my body the way weightlifting is. And I'd get back in the gym and I'd say, what is happening to me here? I've lost the love and the desire for it. Like, what is going on? And so I did the only thing I knew how to do, which was I turned to some podcasts for some people that I knew would kick me in the rear. And, you know, Andy Frisella and David Goggins. Yep. And actually Kurt reached out to me out of the blue and said, hey, have you read this book? And it was a book, I'm trying to remember his name now. His name is Cameron something. He's a bow hunter. And Cameron Haynes. Yes. And he said, this guy is a bow hunter, and I want to become a bow hunter now. And I'm like, what? So awesome. Are you kidding me? A bow hunter is so random, right? But I'm just so used to hearing this from Kurt the last couple of years, right? And he knows that I'm a reader, so he you know, he's always like, oh, I'm reading this. This is a really good one. So I'm like, okay. So download it into my Audible, because I don't have the time to sit around and flip through a book. And I spent a lot of time in the car with my kids and started reading that. And I'm like, okay. All right. We got things back on track now. And that's just to say that nobody stays in constant momentum. Nobody constantly feels like doing it every day. I mean, I think that it was Cameron Haynes that has I think his shirt says like, nobody cares, do it anyways, or nobody cares, try harder. And that was exactly it. I said, well, you know what? No one's going to notice if I don't do this, but my body's going to suffer. And my kids, who I've always felt it was very, very important for my kids to see that they had very active parents. Like, my kids are going to see it. Am I willing to have my kids come up and say, hey, Mom, you know, you used to be so gung-ho about fitness, and you were all fit, and you were like going and winning races and stuff. And like, now you don't do anything. Like, do I want that? So that little bit of like, I hate to call it self-bullying, but it kind of is a little bit of self-bullying, was like enough to like just switch that lever in my brain to be like, okay, like, snap out of this cowl. Like, what are you doing? Like, get back to work. So, but it took me a good 5 or 6 weeks after I was cleared to go back to working out, of kind of mulling in my, I hate to say self-pity because that just sounds so pathetic, but it wasn't self-pity. It was just almost complacency. Like I didn't care. And that's the worst.
It's probably like, it's that process of like being set back so far.
Mm-hmm. And
then for me, it would always tend to be like, if I suffered an injury or whatever it was, or I got sick, it was just like, I don't feel that I'm progressing forward if I'm not outperforming what I was doing the day before.
Exactly.
And it's that internal monologue of like, you're weak, you're X, Y, Z, or like, if I'm not stronger than I was yesterday, then I'm weak.
Yeah.
There's no, like, for me, there's no this nice gray area to hang out in.
No, we're not gray people. We're not gray people.
Yeah,
no, it's black or white. I'm like, I am just a slug on the couch right now, and this needs to change. This needs to absolutely change. And I made myself like do my whole body composition so I could see like, how much fat have I gained? How much muscle have I lost? Like all the torturous things, right? Because that's what it took for me. I know what motivates me. And so doing all that and being like, okay, like now it's time to get back into the swing of things. And so I think something that people who don't live in the gray area do well is they're very good at putting the spotlight on themselves and saying, yeah, I'm okay, but I could be a lot better, you know? My husband talks about this when he was going through Ranger School, which I don't know if you've ever watched the Ranger School games on TV. It's so intense. It's absolutely ridiculous what they put these men through. Pretty badass, but insane. And he said one of the guys, I don't know if it was like one of his lieutenants or just another guy who was leading the Ranger School, and he had just won like the Ultimate Ranger or the Ranger Up competition or something. And he was being interviewed on the local news, and the guy was like, you know, what do you attribute to your success? Like how have you become so amazing at this? And the guy said, and my husband talks about this all the time, even though it was like 30 years ago, he says, I'm not that great. It's just that everybody else sucks. And if you know my husband, that is him, because he's just an amazing person, you know, physically and personally, but never thinks it's good enough. There's always something better that could be done. And again, like he's my inner circle. So that's what I'm exposed to all the time. And sometimes it's hard to be married to someone like that. You know, he's not a jerk in any way, shape, or form, but he has these standards for himself. And when I start getting into fitness, then he's like, okay, well, let's see what you can do now. So I think that also helped me to kind of get out of my rut was like, look what I'm surrounded with, you know, and that's what, again, it comes back to your circle. It comes right back to your circle.
So moving into kind of our final segment here, I'm wondering what do you think would be, if any, the negatives of being an individual such as ourselves that operates in that black and white and has a very hard time, if spends any time in that gray area having conversations with people? Or do you think that it's, I don't know, I have a hard time being the black and white guy. I have a hard time even conceptualizing the negatives of it. But do you have any from your perspective?
Well, I mean, considering that, you know, you're male and I'm female, I do think that being this way is a little more acceptable if you're male. Yeah. Because I think it just, you know, men are wired to be the protector, the provider, the fighter. And so I think that having all of those characteristics is absolutely necessary. And I think it's for every man, even the ones that have become super soft. Like I think every man should be wired that way, and they are wired that way. It just depends, you know, if their environment brings it out of them. I don't think it's a problem to be this way. I recognize my own issues. I'm very blunt sometimes. I don't sugarcoat things. I have said things to people and it's come out very factual without feeling. And, even to my kids, I hear my kids say things sometimes. I'm like, oh my goodness, they're like little me's. Like, you know, they're like me, especially my middle child is very blunt and he's very black and white, but he knows what he believes. He stands very firm on what he believes. I really, really respect him. And my oldest knows what he believes, but he's more diplomatic. And my youngest is, you know, she's female, and sometimes I have to rein her back in too and remind her, like, you can still be nice to people. You can be factual, but still be nice to people. I think there's not an issue with people like us as long as the world still has empaths. And I think I've spoken to a lot of my friends who feel that they're just empathetic to a fault. And while I myself would never consider myself an empath, I think it's necessary because you need the people that are just going to charge in like a buffalo and get stuff done, even when it's not popular, even when it's unattractive, even when it means to their own detriment or demise. But you also need the people to appeal to the human side of things, because the way that we do things, I think, is very almost mechanical in nature, almost robotic in nature. And but you need that. You need things to be done. And it's like you know, it's like math. There's only one right answer. There's one way this needs to be done, so it's got to be done. But then I think you need the smoothing down and the spoonful of sugar people, I like to call them. Yeah. And that's really important, is to have, you know, the empaths around you. And I think that it's interesting. I have a lot, like I said, I have a lot of friends that are empaths, and I'm like, what attracts you to me? And they're like, because I could never be that way, and I would love to be that way. And sometimes I think, you know, I really wish I could be a little nicer in how I respond to things sometimes. But then I catch myself and I'm like, no, this is the way I was made. And I say what needs to be said, and I don't make apologies for that. But I think it's important. That's why it just takes all kinds in this world. I think that's really important. But I think more people than not need to be doers. I think there needs to be more doing. I think there needs to be more standing on the hill of what's right and doing it regardless of what everybody else says. I think that's what's lacking in the world. So I think that's why people with yours and my personality types are probably not vilified, but maybe made out to be these like extremists sometimes, because the world is just progressively going to a place where we want to smooth everything out and make everybody equal. And everybody is not equal. Everybody should not be equal. If you're not willing to work hard for something, you should not be equal to the person who is. And I think that's where we go wrong. So as the balance starts to shift, it continues to shift in the world. You know, people becoming more dependent on social systems and government, and people like you and I are going to continue to really stand out like a sore thumb.
Right.
And I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing.
I don't either. I've always, I mean, if I'm labeled as an extremist,
it
must mean I do extreme things. So that sounds awesome
to
me.
Yeah.
And I think the beautiful relationship that I've observed, at least, between myself and individuals who more are in that empathetic, sympathetic kind of role, or at least communication style, interaction with the world, is there's this bond that grows between the two, because one, like they do need the individual that's going to just charge in, get things done, sometimes to their own detriment, but that's going to charge in and get things done. And a lot of times those people that charge in and get things done, they're moving so quickly that they don't even realize the role that the people in the support roles are playing as well.
Yeah.
For me, I went into business while still in college, took it on full time the day I got out. And, you know, thanks to a lot of people that are not wired the way that I'm wired, I managed to be able to build a successful digital marketing company. And, you know, I've oftentimes, that's probably one of the biggest mistakes I made at the beginning, was I was constantly trying to find, oh, you're like-minded to me. Like, you're like me, you're very high strung, you're high energy, you're get things done, don't ask later.
Right.
You know, don't ask for permission, ask for
forgiveness.
Forgiveness. You're that same mentality as me, like come in, let's partner up, let's do this in business. And then I realized that when it was the business side of things, I didn't need another person like me in there.
No, that's like
two
two bosses
of us in the same room, two people trying to steer the same ship, and one's trying to go right, one's trying to go left potentially. There was a lot of headbutting, but there was a lot of people that weren't wired like me that were great at doing supporting tasks or having a supporting role. I think that's also the beauty and the contrast of the masculine and the feminine. You know, a lot of times, you know, a male or someone that fills, you know, women can fill a masculine frame as well, or take on masculine tendencies. Doesn't mean they're men, but a lot of times, like the more masculine dominant males, they oftentimes have this, or they have the need for that feeling of a supportive feminine role female.
Yes. In the traditional sense.
In the traditional sense.
Absolutely. Correct. Absolutely. Would, you know, there's this push towards, you know, the trad wife movement, which is, you know, again, everything goes so extreme on social media, but I've met so many people in my life who know me and then are very surprised to find out, like, when I go home, that my husband and I subscribe to pretty traditional gender roles in our home and traditional biblical gender roles in our house. And that some people are shocked to find out I do all the cooking. Well, if my family and I want to eat good meals, I'm going to do all the cooking because my husband can't cook. But, you know, I can tell you, I have never cut a lawn or taken a bag of trash out in my entire life. And that just works in our home. Like, that's just, you know, we split other things, but I'm like, he's also the primary breadwinner. So it makes sense that I would be the primary caretaker for the kids. And that, you know, after I leave the gym training for a Spartan race, I go home and I, you know, bake bread and make elderberry syrup. Like, and my husband knows he comes home and he's taken care of. And I think that it hurts my heart that so many younger women today have been sold this lie of to be that woman to their husband or to their, you know, to their significant other is a weakening. Because I've never felt stronger in my life than I have at this stage in the game. You know, I'm in my mid-40s. I am probably the fittest I've ever been. I've been married for 20 some odd years and still, again, lock horns with my husband constantly, but this was what I was meant to be. And I can feel it because things just work in our household and they work for my husband and my kids. And I think that I would just love for more women, young women, I'm not, you know, talking to women my age, but young women to understand, like, it is not a weakening. It's actually a strengthening to recognize how much men need women and women need men. I mean, absolutely. I mean, we need each other and there's nothing weak about that. There's absolutely nothing weak about needing each other. But that's just something that the world tells us isn't true. And we do. We need each other to fill the gaps and voids that the other gender doesn't have. So I would love to see that change. I'm very passionate about that.
I mean, I obviously couldn't agree more. Me being, I just turned 26. So I can tell you firsthand that dating pool, as far as women are concerned that are around my age and younger, I'll tell you a story of one of the times. I was out and I think the conversation comes up. I'm very blunt, upfront. Like, I'm like, hey, let's check some boxes. I'll pay, like,
before even the second date.
Even, like,
before the second, yeah. We tell our sons that all the time. We're like, there's a few things you need to get out of the way up front.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And so I like to check boxes. I'm not a fan of kind of just wasting anybody's time, more or less. And so some of my questions are along the lines of, like, you see children in the future? Yes or no? Okay. You know, kind of the masculine, feminine, the traditional gender roles, those kinds of things. And have only really had one, like, more of a abrasive reaction to that. And her response was something along the lines of, like, oh, so you just expect me to be a housewife? And said it as if it was, like, the way she phrased it, the tonality she was using, she was phrasing it as this insult.
Yeah.
Right?
I'd love to have been a fly on the wall during that conversation.
My response to her was very calm after she kind of portrayed it once again as like an insult. And I said, Well, to be honest with you, I am looking for a female to be in my life that would be for me and my children what my mother was to me. And that's how I've always framed it up. And it's like, so if you are going to frame that up as an insult, know that you are currently insulting the most important woman in my life as of right now.
Right.
And
your mom was a traditional mom, stay-at-home mom.
Stay-at-home mom. My father was a fish and game warden.
Oh, wow. Okay.
You know, and they just made it work. I mean, we never had much access necessarily, but she stayed home with my younger brother and I. And then I think once we were probably, I want to say maybe like 7 or 8 years old. I was 7 or 8. My brother would have been 4 or 5. But once we were kind of like getting more into the school and spending more time at school, she actually got a job at the school.
Okay.
And then she would take us to school and she'd see us in the halls and stuff like that. But to me, it's very, it's discouraging. It really is discouraging. And I can't help but think a lot of times I think like, oh my gosh, like there's got to be so many other guys like me out there. But the reality is this global feminization of men or demasculinization of men that we're seeing. And I believe it's systematic too. I'm starting to come to the realization that like, there's probably not a lot of guys that feel that struggle the way that I do, because they're becoming more fluid with it. They're like, oh, well, I'm okay with this and I'm okay with that.
Right.
Or I disagree with that, but I'll make it work.
Right. I don't think it's as dismal as you may be observing.
Hopefully not.
I'm hopefully not. My son is in college. He's a sophomore at Coastal. And just talking to him and some of the guys that he, fraternizes with, and some of the boys at our church, I say boys, but they're like your age and a little younger. They do exist, and I actually see it growing. The push towards coming back to traditional masculinity, because I think people are seeing that fluidity that is happening is not okay. And even when I'm talking to my kids and they say something and it makes my head spin, because I say, when I was your age, that would never have been okay. And I realize it's just the world frosting over these changes. Like, oh, it's okay. Like just a little bit of this and a little bit of this. And oops, sorry. It becomes to the point where I fear for the young in our generation, my generation, your generation. But here's the thing: what you need to do, and the same thing I tell my kids, is like, you need to attract more people like you, and they exist. And I think coming back full circle to what we said about us not living in that gray area, people will be attracted to you because they either embody the same qualities or they want to embody the same qualities. And that's where you'll see that it is starting to grow. Like, I had no idea before 5 years ago that that there were that many women out there who thought the same as me, that leaned the same way politically, that put faith as such an important aspect of their life, that loved their husband and didn't feel the need to complain about him, because it's kind of become okay to complain about your spouse. It's kind of become okay to drown your sorrows in alcohol. It's kind of become the norm. And what I'm finding is that people like you who don't embody the norm stand out from the crowd, and you'll attract others that are the same. And it's like, you need to stick to your ideals on that. That is so important. It is, I've heard many times, it's a dismal dating pool right now. And I've said many times to my husband, thank goodness I'm not trying to find a partner.
Church seems to be I'm glad you mentioned that. That seems to be the only pocket where I have found. And
yes, and that's what I was going to suggest.
Wasn't like, very similar to you.
Yep.
Wasn't really raised with a concrete foundation of that. Very recently kind of found it. I'm currently like kind of bouncing around churches trying to find my way. But that's been like some of the only pockets where I'm meeting people. I'm like, whoa, this feels foreign, and yet it shouldn't.
Right.
This feels like this is right.
Because you weren't raised that way. You weren't raised with church probably being such an important part of your foundational values, and I wasn't. And as I've come, back to the church in the last 20 years, and our kids have never known anything different. So when I speak to my kids about, especially my older boys, what they think they would be looking for in a partner, they tend to talk a lot about either what they've heard preached to them in church. They also go to a Christian school, because we won't even get started about the public school system. That's another podcast. Or they talk about what they see embodied at home. And my middle son has said, no, of course I'm going to make millions of dollars so that my wife can stay home and raise our children. Like he says, and he's like, and I'm going to buy you and dad $1 million house. I'm like, well, $1 million doesn't buy too much these days. So maybe you could adjust for inflation. But he says it so matter-of-factly because that's just a part of the fiber of his being. And so that's why it's really, really important that you seek out people like that and never when it comes to your core foundational values, that's something I feel very strongly about. If they don't have it before you get married, they're not going to have it. They are not going to have it. So whatever your check boxes are, even if it takes you another 10 years to check all those boxes, do not waver on those things. I'm not talking about, oh, well, I really like brunettes, but she's blonde, or no, or, whatever. It's these core foundational values that talk to my soul, I'm not wavering on. That's like the best piece of marriage advice I could give anybody, and especially because I'm sure that you and I probably lean the same way with a lot of the other things, politics, that sort of thing. And we don't live in the 50s anymore where people with differing opinions can sit down at the Sunday dinner table and, bicker civilly and still pass around the chocolate cake and have an okay time. Like we live in a time where you kind of have to surround yourself with like-minded people,
right,
for your success, for your happiness, for their success and their happiness. That's just the world we live in. And we need more of that being spread. So yeah, if you're finding it in church, I mean, I know that's most of the young men and women that I know in their 20s, like that's who aren't, engaged or married, are saying that's where I'm finding the people that fit my values.
One of the final holding, like one of the final holding pockets, and what I hope it to become is a grounds for it to grow in strength first and foremost, and then to start to expand out, because that has to be the objective, that has to be the mission, in my opinion. And I think it's because the church has a lot of the churches that I've attended or tried out still talk about that traditional male-female gender roles. And I think the critical importance of that, of having that be at the foundation when you're talking about relationships, when you're talking about family, is it takes the guesswork out.
Right. Yeah.
It enables me to say, okay, well, I'm not shopping around for just a woman to have a fun night with. I'm looking for a partner who wants to potentially start a family with me. And I can then, on date number 1, I can say, can I check some boxes here for a woman that not just is going to please me. It's not to me, like my self-pleasure comes almost last on that list. Of course they have to be physically attractive, X, Y, Z. Those are kind of like pre-date 1 kind of check boxes.
Absolutely. Attraction is important.
It absolutely
and
is.
Remember, your kids grow up and leave and you still want to have an attraction to your spouse.
That's exactly right.
So it's very important, but it's only one checkbox.
Bingo.
Yeah.
And I think but with those traditional gender roles, the thing that a lot of men, I think, aren't taking the time to think about on date 1 through whatever is, can I envision this person raising my children? And this is the way I envision it, is could I be called upon to go overseas or go to war and have zero doubt in the back of my mind that my children are still being raised upon the same moral values and codes that I would have raised them on?
Right. It's a tall order.
It is.
It's a really tall order, but it, like you said, especially when you're meeting somebody has been raised in the church, who has those same foundational values, it's almost like that's not even on the checkbox, because that's just the base.
Yes.
It's like, well, I expect that any man or woman who's been attending church for any time and has a relationship with Christ, that's just their baseline.
Yep.
That should be and it's not, because, it's a human world, it's a fallen world. But I mean, to me, that's the baseline. Now I want to see, okay, now to me, COLDEN, like how does this person fit in my life? And that's the thing, is that when it comes to love, when it comes to intimacy or pleasure or attraction, like all those things, when you have all those foundational things shared with somebody, you are just inclined to do all those other things for them. Like that's the thing, and then it never goes away. So that's really, but if you go based on what the world says, and we are a very disposable society, and there's lots of first dates, second dates, third dates happening with only the intent for hookup, with only the intent for appearances or whatnot. So I don't think those questions are being asked, but I think it's great that you kind of get them out of the way initially, because anybody who has a degree of surprise or becomes ornery over things like that, that's just an easy way to rule out, that person. But I'm sure it's probably a surprise topic on your if I had been asked that on one of my first dates before I got married, I probably would have thought, you are some sort of crazy zealot. But the world was different. The world was different. So
it's predicated to would be upon the grounds of the initiation of communication for me.
Yes.
So if I were to, let's say, stumble upon a fine young woman at church, I'm probably not going to go into that first that first meeting of like, hey, we gotta check some boxes, because I don't know where you're coming from.
Yeah.
That's why I think the church thing is the way. Honestly, when I first started kind of going to church again and checking it out, was going to a lot of different churches, and the only way that my brain knew how to think about it was like, I want to get, when I started working out and getting into fitness, I've always liked being around other healthy people. Mm-hmm. I've always liked being around other people that like to talk about health and fitness and be active and push themselves physically. So do I sit at home or do I go walk around Market Common and get a coffee at a coffee shop hoping I'm going to run into somebody like Kurt? No, but I go and I sign up for a gym membership. Mm-hmm. And I was starting to think about like church through that same lens a little bit. I was like, well, if I want to be around people with good morals and good values, like, shouldn't I just
Where are those
get
people?
A membership at the church?
Right, yeah.
And start going with consistency. A lot of that was what got me to go a little bit consistently, was I was enjoying just the thought of mm-hmm. putting myself in the barbershop, if you want to get your hair cut kind of thing, like mm-hmm. getting around those kinds of people. And it's served me well. I'm still very confused in a lot of regards when it comes to it. Like I feel like a blind guy trying to fumble his way around.
Just in just sitting and listening to the preaching, is that what you mean? Or just with relationships?
When it comes to like the church stuff.
Yeah.
Kind of just, and I was actually like, we went to church up until I was fairly young when we kind of stopped going. Mm-hmm. But the funny story is, growing up in that original town where I had a class size of 8 kids, my mom tells the story of how we came about not going to church anymore. There's obviously really only one church that's even within a reasonable distance to go to in the small town. And the reason that we ceased going in my younger years was one of the members of the church approached my mother. People think I'm high energy now. I was an absolute chaotic maniac as a child. And I would be crawling under the pews and mm-hmm. doing all this. And my mother just did her best to try and hold me down and watch my brother.
There's no children's ministry. You were in service with your parents.
Some of them, yes. There was like a Sunday school kind of thing. But mm-hmm. a lot of times I was in there, and one of the members of the church approached my mother and said, hey, maybe it's best that you just come. Like, basically we're insinuating like, this kid's a maniac. You should leave him at home.
Yeah, he's disruptive. He shouldn't be here.
And my mother said, well, if a church is going to like not want me to bring my children, there's no way we're going here anymore. Mm-hmm. That was kind of how we kind of separated from it.
And that's a shame that one small action on that gentleman's part kept you from the word for how many years? I mean, you said you've just recently gone back. So
yeah,
maybe 15, 20 years. I mean, I don't know. Like
probably 15 years or so.
And that's just wild. I mean, it just goes to show how like one small movement in the world can have such a huge ripple effect.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right? It's crazy.
But I have that, the beauty of that is that I have that lesson from that anecdote my mother shared with me the way I'm looking at it and trying to approach it now is a lot of the confusion that I'm having with it, a lot of the friction, I guess, that I feel with it tends to not come from the word or the sitting and listening to the preaching. Mm-hmm. It actually tends to be in my interactions with people
at the church
before and after.
Really?
Like for me, some of the churches I've been to, actually one of the churches I've been to, I went in and I was kind of just observing the people around, and it was in a more affluent area. Mm-hmm. And I was just like, some of the conversations that were going on, I was like, this is so surface level. And then I left and I felt like almost like turned away from it. I was like, oh, like that was whatever. Then I realized it's like everything was beautiful up until the point that other people spoke.
Other humans messed it up.
There you go.
Yeah.
So I'm trying very much to take my time with it, to kind of just like the thing that attracted me to it was not someone telling me I should go.
Right.
I've had people tell me I should go all the time.
Yeah.
But it was just my own kind of coming to it. So I'm kind of trying to take the baby steps on my own as well.
Well, and listen, I mean, sometimes our intuition kicks in really properly. And, you know, when you hear people talking about things like that, I always stop and say, well, does that seem to be like the general sentiment of the people who run the church? Or is it just like, I just happened to stumble across a couple people having this discussion and the church is full of broken sinners? I mean, that's what we all are. And, you know, and if you were loving what you were getting from the word, then I would always say, well, then continue, because clearly whoever's teaching or preaching there has the gift to do that. But on the same time, if that's too much of a distraction for you, then it is time to seek something else out, because we are called to remove distractions that take us away from God, or that put that wedge between us and God, or between us and the word. You know, we've been attending the same church for 20 years here at the beach. And when I first started attending, it's kind of funny. We moved here. We bought a house in Surfside. My husband had to rip up linoleum and carpet to put down hardwood. My in-laws lived in Conway, and they said we could live with them while he was doing that, so we wouldn't be forced to live through home improvement hell. And I had a 6-month-old at the time. She said, my only rule is if you live in my house, you go to my church. And all right, okay, that's fine. I'm fairly newly married. I want to be on my mother-in-law's good side. And, you know, we went to this church, and we've never left, because it hit me like a bullet between my eyes almost the first time that I ever heard the preaching. I had never heard the Bible preached that way. I had never gone through it verse by verse. I had never been in a sermon where it was more the word rather than traditions and pomp and circumstance. And to me, that was like groundbreaking. But of course, that's the way the first churches were done. It was just men and women just got together and just listened to preaching. And there have been times where I get distracted by something at church. And very early on in my faith walk, I would have complaints about things. And it was really just a grumbling heart. It was just me being sour grapes about things. And my husband would say, you know, you're allowing other people to take you away from the word. Like, and thank God he had the wisdom to say things. And I would get very offended by that, because you don't know what you're talking about. But he was right. He was very right. He was very wise to say that, and to tell his wife to basically like clamp her mouth shut and just listen and let God work on my heart. And that's the cool thing. If you go to a church and you hear the word and just let God continue to work on your heart, it's like all of a sudden you start to block out like all that extraneous noise and all that extra stuff that was distracting you. Like, it doesn't become a distraction anymore to you. So that's kind of a cool thing that I think as you progress further, you realize that we're still sinners. The people around us are still sinners, but you learn to have a little bit more grace with everybody than maybe you had. And I think, and again, sometimes it's hard for people like us to have grace, you know, because we're high achievers and we're constantly seeking after outperforming ourselves. But it's always good to have that grace with other people and with ourselves. And the church will teach you that.
I appreciate that insight. Well, Alex, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on the podcast. Where can all the folks find you? Whatever your businesses are, feel free to plug anything in that you want to.
My main business is Alex's Elderberries. So it's just alexeselderberries.com. That's my website. They can link to my Instagram from there. I have another kind of fitness-based Instagram, which is just crushgoals_live_hard, which is just kind of a spinoff of Goggins and Frizella brought together. I'm pretty much on Facebook and Instagram, but and I have a medical freedom group that I run on Facebook called Health Choice and Freedom Myrtle Beach and Grand Strand. So if there's any parents that are looking for support as they navigate the medical freedom world, then that's what we're there to do, is educate and provide support.
That's great. I'm going to have you send me probably all those links.
Okay.
And I'll make sure that they're included in the description for
Sure.
folks that are looking. It's been, once again, absolutely great having you on.
It's been great. I've enjoyed it.
You mentioned the public school thing, so maybe in the future.
Yeah.
A full public school one, because I would love to talk about that.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Thank you.
All right. Thanks.